I'm joined now by Ben Graham-Jones, election observer and campaign analyst. Ben, very good afternoon. Thanks so much for speaking to us. Just give us your overall perceptions or overview of what's transpired in the last few days and this appointment or election of Keir Starmer, and what is it that he faces? Just how much work does he have to do to impress those that voted him into power?
Expectations are high. There's a lot of tasks on the table, and there is a sense that this is a new epoch, and this generates expectations that may be different to the previous governments, and it generates a sense that he has a high bar to live up to. We'll see how that transpires. But really, Hugo, this was a story. This was two stories in this election. We had the story for the Labour Party, which was a story of transformation. They suffered a major defeat in 2019, and they've had to undergo a process of turning that party around. And in doing so, they've moved more and more to the centre. They've had to make sometimes difficult decisions to alienate spoilers in their own party, to move from the most left-wing platform it had put forward in the party's recent history to a centrist platform that it put forward in this election. And the second story is that of the Conservative Party, the party which had been in power for 14 years and really had run out of ideas. When they first came into office, they had big ideas about whole society transformation. By the end, they were running around fighting fires and lacked any new initiatives, and they were duly punished by the electorate.
Now, Keir Starmer has been described in some quarters as not the leader you'd expect. Some have called him a manager. What's your take on that?
I think that reflects the strategy that they deployed going into this campaign. For my job, I see elections across the globe, and sometimes you see parties that go into an election really trying to inspire their way to victory. Labour really, I think, went into this campaign on a damage limitation exercise. They were so far ahead in the polls that they knew that all they needed to do was to not mess up, and they were very likely to win power. Let's remember, they only got 1.7% more of the popular vote. If for all of the noise that's being made about this huge victory, they only got 1.7% more of the popular vote than they got in 2019. And so they played a very a relatively conservative campaign. They didn't put out big pledges. They avoided saying anything that they knew they wouldn't be able to afford. But it worked, and they've ended up with a huge majority.
So what do we know about Keir Starmer as an individual? What does he bring to the table?
Well, we know that he's a pragmatist. We know that he has a very positive view of the European Union. We know that he is somebody from the right of the party. So he's someone who has really doesn't come from the more left-wing socialist tradition within the Labour Party. It's a big tent, really, of a left wing and a right wing of the party. He's very much from the right wing of that party. And we also know that he's an internationalist. He's somebody who cares about the UK's reputation in the world. Okay,
so I like that he's an internationalist, and it's going to bring us to a conversation we're going to have in a moment around foreign policy. But before we get to foreign policy, let's talk about Keir Starmer. And one of the things that he talked about was return of politics to public service. I think it was one of his first speeches, if you will. What does that mean, and how do we expect it to translate?
Well, Starmer is someone who, he is genuinely working class. He is from a working class background. He's someone who his partner, his wife, works in the NHS, in the healthcare system. And really, he's been able to contrast that with what we've seen from the Conservative Party, which is a succession of leaders from who are extremely wealthy, who really have been perceived to be extremely out of touch. And so he's been able to create this image of with some justification, of somebody who understands how ordinary people think and feel, the challenges they face in the cost of living crisis. We know also that whilst he didn't go into this election campaigning to overturn Brexit, that's very much a political hot potato in the UK even now. We know that he campaigned to remain within the EU passionately back in the day during the referendum. So we know what his private views are on that. And I think there's a lot of people in the country who hope that he will move to try to establish closer relations with our European colleagues. We also know that on a private level, he is a real Democrat. He's somebody who genuinely does care about democracy. I think he will be alarmed to have seen that turnout drop 7% in this election. And I think he will want to try to inspire with the upcoming administration in a way that maybe he didn't during the campaign.
Well, let's talk about the thorny issue of foreign policy. There are a number of issues. Immigration is topical, with potentially many migrants being sent to Rwanda in the next few weeks. Is this likely to be overturned? What are his views on this? What are his views on conflict that's happening in Europe and elsewhere?
So the Rwanda plan will be scrapped. Labour will abolish this. So this idea was essentially to try to deter people who were crossing the channel between France and the UK illegally, often paying criminal gangs to get them across the channel, often to great tragedy. Many of these boats were sinking, often with children on them, we had deaths every month because of these crossings. And it's something which I think for many Brits was appalling to have this humanitarian crisis on our doorstep. So the idea of the Rwanda policy was that this would be a disincentive for people to come across. Well, that hasn't worked. No flights have even taken off. It's been something that the Conservatives talked about for years and didn't implement. And the evidence suggested that it wouldn't work even if they got it off the ground. So that's going to be scrapped. And they won't pursue that policy. Instead, what they're going to do is invest in greater border security. So that's really their approach to that. But that also speaks to Labour's fundamental values, which is much more tolerant of migration. I think they recognise that the UK has a skills shortage at the moment, and that migration may need to be part of the solution to that. In terms of the conflict in the Middle East, he's had to walk a very fine line on this, because his party has itself is divided. Labour lost a number of seats, or were challenged in a number of seats at this election by single-issue candidates who were running on a platform about Gaza. But on the other hand, Labour has also got many people, many parliamentarians who are sympathetic to Israel. And so he's had to really tread a middle way on this. And we might continue to see that as we transition into the Labour government.
Now, one of the people that congratulated Keir Starmer on his victory was President Cyril Ramaphosa, as you know, the president of South Africa. So let's talk about relations with South Africa, with Africa. What his stance is he likely to carry?
So I think it's always been a strong relationship for the UK, but certainly I think in recent years the move of South Africa to really invest in its BRICS partnership is something that in some ways I think has thrown perhaps if not a wedge, has certainly channeled a different foreign policy course than that which the UK is on. For the UK, our alliance with the United States has always been and will remain the most important alliance, and that will continue under the Starmer administration. I think we've yet to see how the new administration in South Africa will play out its course on foreign policy. But once that becomes clearer, I think we'll have a sense of what those relations will be like. Of course, there's many South Africans in the UK and many Brits in South Africa, and certainly the interests of those communities, I'm sure, will be foremost in the minds of leaders in both of our countries.
Now, let's touch on inclusivity, because Prime Minister Starmer's called for collective effort in the mission of national renewal. What does that mean to those that didn't vote for him, or certainly those that lost in the election?
Well, he will certainly have to govern for the whole country, because he has his majority is precarious. Our system favours large majorities, and he's secured a large majority, but he hasn't really. This is the lowest. Proportion of the vote that a majority government has won in a long time in the UK. And so he will need to win some of those votes back. He's got challenges from a very charismatic populist politician called Nigel Farage, who's openly said that he's now going to look out for the votes to try to secure more votes from Labour. He's got, of course, a challenge from the Conservative Party, which will now undergo a process of renewal. And then you've got the pro-Europeans, the Liberal Democrats, who, in an era where the prospect potentially of overturning some of the damage of Brexit will be coming to the forefront of people's minds once again, will also be looking to take some of that vote. So he will need to govern not just for Labour voters, but for the whole country. And that's really one of the challenges that he faces moving forward.
Now, something you mentioned was the system of processes within the United Kingdom and the appointment of the Prime Minister. And there was the the King and the formal process of appointing the new Prime Minister. Just walk us through those modalities. What does it all mean?
So, whereas most countries have a transition, the UK doesn't have a transition. It's immediate. So, straight the day after the election, your Prime Minister Sunak had to pack up his belongings, take his socks out the drawer, pack up his bags, and off he went. Left Number 10, the Prime Minister's office. On the other hand, Keir Starmer, exhausted from staying up all night for the election, then has to come in, move his things into Number 10, go and meet the King, and accept the mandate of government. He announced his cabinet on day one. But this also reflects that the result, in many ways, we knew that Labour was going to come in. This was something that everybody knew was going to happen. The opinion polls said it was clear. It wasn't like the South African situation where there was ambiguity over the administration we would ultimately have, and you had that process of coalition negotiations. That didn't need to happen in the UK, and that's also helped there to be a very swift transition. We can expect over the coming days that there will be policy announcements will start to come out, and will really try to give the population the sense that the government is moving on day one.